Chapter 20. Whether fortresses and other things which princes often make are useful or injurious. Some princes, in order to secretly hold their possessions, have disarmed their subjects. Some others have kept their subject lands divided into parts. Others have fomented enmities against themselves. Others have endeavored to win over those whom they suspected at the commencement of their rule. Some have constructed fortresses. Others have ruined and destroyed them. And although one cannot pronounce a definite judgment as to these things without going into the particulars of the state to which such a deliberation is to be applied, still I will speak in such a broad way as the matter will permit of. A new prince has never been known to disarm his subjects. On the contrary, when he has found them disarmed, he has always armed them, for by arming them these arms become your own. Those that you suspected become faithful, and those that were faithful remain so, and from being merely subjects become your partisans. And since all the subjects cannot be armed, when you benefit those that you arm, you can deal more safely with the others, and this different treatment that they notice renders your men more obliged to you. The others will excuse you, judging that those have necessarily greater merit who have greater danger and heavier duties. But when you disarm them, you commence to offend them and show that you distrust them either through cowardice or lack of confidence, and both of these opinions generate hatred against you. And as you cannot remain unarmed, you are obliged to resort to a mercenary militia, of which we have already stated the value. And even if it were good, it cannot be sufficient in number to defend you against powerful enemies and suspected subjects. But as I have said, a new prince in a new dominion always has his subjects armed. History is full of such examples. But when a prince acquires a new state as an addition to his old one, then it is necessary to disarm that state, except those who in acquiring it have sided with you. And even these one must, when time and opportunity serve, render weak and effeminate, and arrange things so that all the arms of the new state are in the hands of your own soldiers who in your old state live near you. Our forefathers and those who were esteemed wise used to say that it was necessary to hold Pistoia by means of factious and Pisa with fortresses, and some for this purpose they fomented differences among their subjects in some town in order to possess it more easily. This, in those days when Italy was fairly divided, was doubtless well done, but does not seem to me to be a good precept for the present time, for I do not believe that the divisions thus created ever do any good. On the contrary, it is certain that when the enemy approaches, the cities thus divided will be at once lost, for the weaker faction will always side with the enemy, and the other will not be able to stand. The Venetians, actuated, I believe, by the aforesaid motives, cherished the Guelph and Ghibelline factions in the cities subject to them, and although they never allowed them to come to bloodshed, they yet encouraged these differences among them, so that the citizens, being occupied in their own quarrels, might not act against them. This, however, did not avail them anything, as was seen when, after the defeat of Viella, a part of those subjects immediately took courage and took from them the whole state. Such methods, besides, argue weakness in a prince, for in a strong government such dissensions will never be permitted. They are profitable only in time of peace, as by means of them it is easy to manage one's subjects, but when it comes to war, the fallacy of such a policy is at once shown. Without doubt, princes become great when they overcome difficulties and opposition, and therefore fortune, especially when it wants to render a new prince great, who has greater need of gaining a great reputation than a hereditary prince, raises up enemies and compels him to overtake wars against them, so that he may have cause to overcome them, and thus raise himself higher by means of that ladder which his enemies have brought him. There are many who think, therefore, that a wise prince ought, when he has the chance, to foment astutely some enmity, so that by suppressing it he will augment his greatness. Princes, and especially new ones, have found more faith and more usefulness in those men, whom at the beginning of their power they regarded with suspicion, than in those that they at first confided in. Pandolfo Petrucci, Prince of Siena, governed his state more by those whom he suspected than by others. But of this we cannot speak at large, as it varies according to the subject. I will merely say that these men who at the beginning of a new government were enemies, if they are of a kind to need support to maintain their position, can be very easily gained by the prince, and they are the more compelled to serve him faithfully as they know they must by their deeds cancel the bad opinion previously held of them, and thus the prince will always derive greater help from them than from those serving him with greater security, neglect his interest. And as the matter requires it, I will not omit to remind a prince who has newly taken a state with the secret help of its inhabitants, that he must consider well the motives that have induced those who have favored him to do so, and if it is not natural affection for him, but only because they were not contented with the state as it was, he will have great trouble and difficulty in maintaining their friendship, because it will be impossible for him to content them. And on well examining the cause of this in the examples drawn from ancient and modern times, it will be seen that it is much easier to gain the friendship of those men who were contented with the previous condition and were therefore at first enemies, than that of those who, not being contented, became his friends and helped him to occupy it. It has been the custom of princes, in order to be able to hold securely their state, to erect fortresses as a bridle and bit to those who have designs against them, and in order to have a secure refuge against a sudden assault. I approve this method because it was anciently used. Nevertheless, Messer Niccolo Vitelli has been seen in our own time to destroy 2 fortresses in Città di Castello in order to keep that state. Guide Ubaldo, Duke of Urbino, on returning to his dominions from which he had been driven by Cesare Borgia, razed to their foundations all the fortresses of that province, and considered that without them it would be more difficult for him to lose again the state. The Bentivogli, in returning to Bologna, used similar measures. Therefore, fortresses may or may not be useful according to the times. If they do good in one way, they do harm in another. The question may be discussed thus. A prince who fears his own people more than foreigners ought to build fortresses, but he who has greater fear of foreigners than of his own people ought to do without them. The castle of Milan, built by Francesco Sforza, has given and will give more trouble to the house of Forza than any other disorder in that state. Therefore, the best fortress is to be found in the love of the people, for although you may have fortresses, they will not save you if you are hated by the people. When once the people have taken arms against you, there will never be lacking foreigners to assist them. In our times, we do not see that they have profited any ruler, except the Countess of Forli on the death of her consort, Count Girolamo, for she was thus enabled to escape the popular rising and await help from Milan and recover the state, the circumstances being then such that no foreigner could assist the people. But afterwards they were of little use to her when Cesare Borgia attacked her, and the people, being hostile to her, allied themselves with the foreigner. So that then and before it would have been safer for her not to be hated by the people than to have the fortresses. Having considered these things, I would therefore praise the one who erects fortresses and the one who does not, and would blame anyone who, trusting in them, thinks little of being hated by his people. Chapter 21. How a Prince Must Act in Order to Gain Reputation. Nothing causes a prince to be so much esteemed as great enterprises and setting a rare example. We have in our own day Ferdinand, King of Aragon, at present King of Spain. He may also be termed a new prince, because from a weak king he has become for fame and glory the first king in Christendom, and if you regard his actions you will find them all very great and some of them extraordinary. At the beginning of his reign he assailed Granada, and that enterprise was the foundation of his state. At first he did it leisurely and without fear of being interfered with. He kept the minds of the barons of Castile occupied in this enterprise, so that thinking only of that war, they did not think of making innovations, and he thus acquired reputation and power over them, without their being aware of it. He was able with the money of the church and the people to maintain his armies, and by that long war lay the foundations of his military power, which afterwards has made him famous. Besides this, to be able to undertake greater enterprises, and always under the pretext of religion, he had recourse to a pious cruelty, driving out the Moors from his kingdom and despoiling them. No more admirable or rare example can be found. He also attacked under the same pretext Africa, undertook his Italian enterprise, and has lately attacked France, so that he has continually contrived great things, which have kept his subjects' minds uncertain and astonished, and occupied in watching their result. And these actions have arisen one out of the other, so that they have left no time for men to settle down and act against him. It is also very profitable for a prince to give some rare examples of himself in the internal administration, like those related of Messer Bernabo of Milan, when it happens that someone does something extraordinary, either good or evil, in civil life, and to take a means of rewarding or punishing him which will be much talked about. And above all, a prince must endeavor in every action to obtain fame for being great and excellent. A prince is further esteemed when he is a true friend or a true enemy, when, that is, he declares himself without reserve in favor of some one against another. This policy is always more useful than remaining neutral. For if two neighboring powers come to blows, they are either such that if one wins, you will have to fear the victor or else not. In either of these two cases, it will be better for you to declare yourself openly and make war, because in the first case, if you do not declare yourself, you will fall a prey to the victor, to the pleasure and satisfaction of the one who has been defeated, and you will have no reason nor anything to defend you, and nobody to receive you. For whoever wins will not desire friends whom he suspects, and who do not help him when in trouble. And whoever loses will not receive you, as you did not take up arms to assist his cause. Antiochus went to Greece, being sent by the Aetoli to expel the Romans. He sent orators to the Achaii, who were friends of the Romans, to encourage them to remain neutral. On the other hand, the Romans persuaded them to take up arms on their side. The matter was brought before the council of the Achaii for deliberation, where the ambassador of Antiochus sought to persuade them to remain neutral, to which the Roman ambassador replied, "As to what is said that it is best and most useful for your state not to meddle in our war, nothing is further from the truth, for if you do not meddle in it, you will become, without any favor or any reputation, the prize of the victor. And it will always happen that the one who is not your friend will want you to remain neutral, and the one who is your friend will require you to declare yourself by taking arms. Irresolute princes, to avoid present dangers, usually follow the way of neutrality and are mostly ruined by it. But when the prince declares himself frankly in favor of one side, if the one to whom you adhere conquers, even if he is powerful and you remain at his discretion, he is under an obligation to you, and friendship has been established, and men are never so dishonest as to oppress you with such ingratitude. Moreover, victories are never so prosperous that the victor does not need to have some scruples, especially as to justice. But if he to whom you adhere loses, you are sheltered by him, and so long as he can, he will assist you. You become the companion of a fortune which may rise again. In the second case, when those who fight are such that you have nothing to fear from the victor, it is still more prudent on your part to adhere to one, for you go to the ruin of one with the help of him who ought to save him if he were wise, and if he conquers, he rests at your discretion, and it is impossible that he should not conquer with your help. And here it should be noted that a prince ought never to make common cause with one more powerful than himself to injure another, unless necessity forces him to it, as before said, for if he wins you rest at his discretion, and princes must avoid as much as possible being at the discretion of others. The Venetians united with France against the Duke of Milan, although they could have avoided that union, and from it resulted their own ruin. But when one cannot avoid it, as happened to the Florentines when the Pope and Spain went with their armies to attack Lombardy, then the prince ought to join for the above reasons. And let no state believe that it can follow a secure policy, rather let it think that all are doubtful. This is found in the nature of things, that one never tries to avoid one difficulty without running into another, but prudence consists in being able to know the nature of the difficulties and taking the least harmful as good. A prince must also show himself a lover of merit and honor those who excel in every art. Moreover, he must encourage his citizens to follow their callings quietly, whether in commerce or agriculture, or any other trade that men follow, so that this one shall not refrain from improving his possessions through fear that they may be taken from him, and that one from starting a trade for fear of taxes, but he should offer rewards to whoever does these things, and to whoever seeks in any way to improve his city or state. Besides this, he ought, at convenient seasons of the year, to keep the people occupied with festivals and spectacles, and as every city is divided either into trades or into classes, he ought to pay attention to all these things, mingle with them from time to time, and give them an example of his humility and magnificence, always holding firm, however, the majesty of his dignity, which must never be allowed to fan in anything whatsoever. Chapter 22 of the Secretaries of Princes. The choice of a prince's ministers is a matter of no little importance. They are either good or not according to the prudence of the prince. The first impression that one gets of a ruler and of his brains is from seeing the men that he has about him. When they are competent and faithful, one can always consider him wise, as he has been able to recognize their ability and keep them faithful. But when they are the reverse, one can always form an unfavorable opinion of him, because the first mistake that he makes is in making this choice. There was nobody who knew Messer Antonio da Venafro as the minister of Pandolfo Petrucci, Prince of Siena, who did not consider Pandolfo to be a very prudent man, having him for his minister. There are three different kinds of brains: the one who understands things unassisted, the other understands things when shown by others, the third understands neither alone nor with the explanations of others. The first kind is most excellent, the second is also excellent, but the third useless. It is therefore evident that if Pandolfo was not of the first kind, he was at any rate of the second. For every time that one has the judgment to know the good and evil that any one does or says, even if he has no invention, yet he recognizes the bad and good works of his minister and corrects the one and supports the other, and the minister cannot hope to deceive him and therefore remains good. For a prince to be able to know a minister, there is this method which never fails. When you see the minister think more of himself than of you, and in all his actions seek his own profit, such a man will never be a good minister, and you can never rely on him. For whoever has in hand the state of another must never think of himself but of the prince, and not call to mind anything but what relates to him. And on the other hand, the prince, in order to retain his fidelity, ought to think of his minister, honoring and enriching him, doing him kindnesses, and conferring on him honors and giving him responsible tasks, so that the great honors and riches bestowed on him cause him not to desire other honors and riches, and the tasks he has to fulfill make him fearful of changes, knowing that he could not execute them without the prince. When princes and their ministers stand in this relation to each other, they can rely the one upon the other. When it is otherwise, the end is always injurious either for one or the other of them.